Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to another fine Wednesday morning. Welcome to another coffee break chat. I'm your host, James Jackson, he, they pronouns, executive producer, Light Thief Productions, and I'm just double checking some settings over here on my end. Make sure that I'm not messing anything up. Looks like audio is going out via the correct microphone. For those of you who are used to the show, you may notice that I'm using a different camera than usual. But that'll all get taken care of in the weeks to come. Just had to set up my old camera because the new camera setup was out of position because I was out of town for the last couple of weeks. So, what do we have for you today? We've got a good show for you today. Great guest, interesting topics. We're going to be talking infrastructure and climate change. Getting things and people in places in Philadelphia. We'll talk about the Christmas Village grant. We'll talk about Outlaw being out. We'll talk about DeSantis being at 18%. And we'll talk about the Stop Cop City protests. Following all of that, probably at this point, will be our special guest, Timothy Caso, talking about World War II activist Irena Sendler. Irena, if you would like to look it up, Irena was an activist in World War II who helped get Jewish children out of the ghettos and into Polish families, and then from there overseas or away from the Nazis and the German occupation of France, Poland, and most of Western Europe. Anyway, that's all. It'll be an interesting show. We're starting a little bit backwards today because my guest isn't here yet, but hopefully we'll be joined by our guest shortly. So let's talk Christmas Village grant. We can talk about that real quick. Every year, Philadelphia has the Christmas Village. Those of you that live here may love it or hate it. Whether you love it or hate it, it seems to be a relatively popular destination for folks from about Black Friday until a couple of days after Christmas. And so the city of Philadelphia every year gives a grant out through its cultural fund to nonprofit organizations to be able to afford to have one of those booths or stalls at Christmas Village, and basically pays the rent on the stall so that the nonprofit organization can be hosted there. In years past, some of the nonprofit organizations have hosted multiple other small businesses and companies in kind of a hey, this is all cool fashion. It seems to be a really neat idea. I think it's kind of a cool idea. It does open up the kind of the accessibility of having your wares at Christmas Village. Yeah, the grant is open. You can apply for that grant. Let me see if I can find the details for you. But you can apply for that grant if you are in the leadership of a nonprofit organization on behalf of your organization. And applying for that grant will hopefully get you the budget to host a bunch of other folks and make Christmas Village a little bit more accessible for people this year. Oh, there we go. It is at phila.gov and slash 2023-08-23-apply-4-2023-Christmas-village-market-grant-application. Yeah. Really long URL, but we'll post it in the comments, and hopefully you can grab it from there. Yeah. So the application is available online, and questions can be directed to an email address, which is soheepeng at the Philadelphia Department of Commerce. I've spoken with Soheep before, and very easy to communicate with person and very helpful. So yeah, get that grant application in, and get some money for your organization to help other organizations. Let's see, Outlaw out. Yeah, so Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw, who has been a contentious police commissioner, to say the least. I find it fascinating. Before Danielle Outlaw took over as police commissioner in Philadelphia, leftist activists and leftist organizations were questioning her ability to do her job, because she came from Portland via Oakland. She had a meteoric rise through Oakland, and became the chief of the Portland Police Bureau, and spent only 3 years there before coming over to Philadelphia and being installed as chief here. And both Portland and Oakland have reputations amongst folks in the activism community for kind of heavy-handed tactics during protests and marches. And so it was surprising to most of the folks that work in activism in Philadelphia that they would bring in Danielle Outlaw. She, her style of policing is kind of anathema to what had been set up as the standard operating procedure in Philadelphia. We had years where, the concept of the Philadelphia police, especially the crowd control police, was, that they would employ break-up tactics and ram tactics. And then we had several years where those tactics were, I believe, rightly changed into a tactic of just keeping everyone safe. No matter what they were protesting, they would keep everybody safe by escorting and or cordoning off side streets, making sure that nobody had violent interactions, that kind of thing. And so that all changed when Danielle Outlaw came on the scene and was immediately tested with the George Floyd protests here in Philadelphia. And some would say poorly. I would say poorly. The police were allowed to tear gas residential neighborhoods. They were brought out in full tactical riot gear instead of what had been typical previous of bicycle police in uniforms. And it became a big mess. And then as the pandemic psychosis, I would say, hit, I call it the pandemic psychosis because everybody had a moment where they felt a little bit out of place. And crime, specifically violent crime, ticked up around the entire country. As that happened, we had folks here in Philadelphia on the right questioning Danielle Outlaw's ability to do her job just because she supposedly wasn't ordering her cops to crack enough heads. She's on her way out. She's going to the Port Authority of New York. She'll be the second in command there for the Port Authority of New York, overseeing bridges and tunnels and the security thereof. I don't know. I find it interesting. I don't know how well it's going to work. We'll see, I guess. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I have my guest here with me. I'm having a little bit of trouble with his video at the moment. Let me get that squared away, and then I will get you on camera. Hang on for me for a second. Yeah, there we go. I don't know what's going on here with my setup. Everything always changes when I'm away for a couple of days, and it's awful. I should just leave this set up here, probably, rather than taking it with me. At any rate, let me fix that and that. Great. Awesome. Not perfect, but we'll go with it. Let me bring on screen and introduce Timothy. Timothy, if you could introduce yourself, your pronouns, what it is you do.
Hi, James. Thank you so much, first of all, for having me on this morning. My name is Tim Caso. He, him are my pronouns. And I am in the financial services world, been there for about 30 years.
Awesome. I also understand that you're a playwright, if I've got that correct.
Well, yes, I've written one play, and that's probably going to be it. But even though I've been asked to write a couple others, but yeah, so far just the one. Reading about this person's story was my inspiration to getting into playwriting. I wanted to tell her story in a more broad fashion.
So that's Irena Sendler. I already introduced the topic to the audience a little bit ago. World War II activist, helped get a lot of Polish children out of the ghettos in World War II. One thing I found interesting as I was reading about her history is that she basically would have remained unknown but for a small group of high school students who found her in their history.
Yes.
If you could talk a little bit about that, I'm sure I found it interesting. But
yeah, it's actually quite fascinating. They were doing a history project and they couldn't find a topic. And someone was just looking through the newspaper one day and saw a very tiny clip of a woman named Irena Sendler, who had said, according to this little article, saved 2,500 children from the Nazi Holocaust in World War II. They initially thought it was a typo, thinking, no way, that's either 25 or 250, over 2,000 children was impossible. There's no way that was true. So they did a little more research and found out that, yes, in fact, that's exactly what had happened. In fact, the number has been estimated to be even more than that. and Irena had saved adults as well. She had quite the storied experience during World War II. But nevertheless, that kicked off this whole movement to get her story told, have her become more well known. It's the subject of a book called Life in a Jar, which was the first book that I had read about her. And the kids had done a play about Irena, a short 10-minute play, and that kind of kicked off. In fact, their play was, I think it's still being shown, if I'm not mistaken. It's been shown over 300 times in the United States and in Europe, especially Poland. So they have really done a remarkable job in bringing her story to the public.
So one of the reasons why her story was kind of hidden, I also found interesting, was that the government of Poland, post-war, was communist, and they were prosecuting and persecuting folks who had been part of the resistance.
That's exactly right. In fact, the ironic thing was that Irena was labeled a fascist of all things immediately after the war. The communist government, as you said, came over and took over and labeled her and her associates as fascists. And so she just remained hidden behind the scenes, didn't talk about anything she had done, because remember, the communists, as they moved in, weren't fans of the Jewish people either. So she made it a point to keep her adventures and her exploits and her heroism really secret.
Interesting. So was this going to get produced for Fringe, or has it been produced yet?
It was going to be produced for Fringe. We had some technical issues, so I had to withdraw the play. I do expect to resurrect it some point next year. And lessons learned from this year, but we just had so many technical issues that we couldn't produce it.
Yeah, it happens. Hopefully, you'll get another shot at it soon, and get some time on stages in front of folks. It's always good to bring these stories to light, especially in today's political climate. You have folks that are actual Holocaust deniers, on the fly rewriting history, even in the U.S.
No
And it's kind of fascinating to even the fact that you found this story, or that these high school students found this story, and brought it back into the forefront is amazing. Like that history didn't get lost. Yeah, that's I find that a great thing. I hope that that continues. What is when do you think you'll be bringing that onto stage, or do you have any plans for it at the moment?
I don't have immediate plans for it. However, I'm thinking 2024. I have a couple producers to talk to about it, and I hope, as I said, I hope to resurrect it next year because it is such an important story. I can't tell you how many calls and emails that I fielded after I had to let everybody know that the play was being canceled this year. One book club called me, a girl from a book club called me. I never heard of these people. And she said, we just finished Life in a Jar. We were so looking forward to coming in and seeing this interpretation of Irena's life. And it's a rather thorough interpretation of her life during the war, in terms of how she got started with the endeavors to save children, and how it ended up. So it's as comprehensive as I could do it in in 90 to 100 minutes.
Awesome. Um, I was gonna say that I don't know if you've seen the show before. I didn't get to do my normal pre-show with you, and apologies for the timing mishap there. But I don't know if you've seen the show before. We kind of talk about your piece and then the day's topics, and I introduced them before you hopped on, but. I love, it's just a general conversation, so feel free to jump in with anything that you have comment on, and I'll also be happy to call on you. I was just talking about the sorry. The overall arcing theme of today is infrastructure and climate change. Philadelphia, we have a lot of infrastructure problems, infrastructure changes. Climate change, is affecting those. One of the things that I just saw as one of the first sort of actual campaign-ish things that Sherelle Parker has done is that she toured the Schuylkill River with a couple of council members and a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to cleaning up small rivers and important rivers around the country in order to mitigate climate change effects. Of course, they did the Schuylkill River, and one of the topics I've touched on in the past with the Philadelphia area is that the Schuylkill River, as well as the Delaware River, is more polluted than what it should be allowed to be, in my opinion. They're both considered a secondary contact waterway, which means that that they're not designed for people to get in or eat fish from or what have you, which lets folks who use the river for industrial purposes, including the city of Philadelphia, pollute a little bit more. The pollution controls are a little bit more lax. So I find it interesting that they did this little tour. It's nice, but one of the first things we really kind of have to do is get the river classified a primary contact waterway, which would immediately call on the city and the industrial users to pollute less and then also clean up some of their pollution. Of course, the city of Philadelphia has a hard time with that because in Philadelphia, our sewage system is a bit older of a design, and the cisterns that hold the sewage before treatment are connected with our streets. And so in a heavy rainfall, the cisterns will overflow. Yeah, it's not a great picture. Yeah. So yeah, the Upstream Alliance is who Cheryl Parker did this tour with. Council members Mark Squilla and Jamie Gauthier, the EAS Carpenters Union, and the Littoral Society, the American Littoral Society, all went on this tour about the potential revitalization of the river and how it can provide economic opportunity for Philadelphians. I'm kind of sad I didn't get invited. I have some feels about that. I have some opinions. I've expressed those opinions many times, but yeah, we'll have to see what we can do to get these folks all on the same page. Um, yeah, I don't know how much impact the river has on your life, but I think it's an important thing for Philadelphia in general.
Well, I think the river has an impact on everyone's life in a way, and cleaning it up. And this visit sounds like a good first step, perhaps to reclassify it as a primary waterway, and therefore the cleaning of it will be more of a priority. But clean energy, clean water, clean air affects everybody, and I think again, this sounds like an important first step for the river.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully, it'll bring the issues more to the forefront
Mhm.
as this mayoral election goes on. We have the Delaware River Waterfront Corporation, which is designed to be a public-private combination that works on river use, specifically the Delaware River use, is supposed to increase the use of the Delaware River by Philadelphians and increase the economic opportunity of the Delaware River for Philadelphians. And I mean, personally, I just feel like it's failing its mission. But yeah, it definitely feels more focused on the land side of the waterway than the water side of the waterway. So
Mhm.
yeah, they're kind of focusing on the 95 cap right now and getting more people to the waterfront itself in a physical manner. Um, I really I'm a big water use person. I came from, a history of being on the Chesapeake and the Potomac every year. And, I've seen what Baltimore did with their harbor.
Mhm.
Um, you know, I think it would be great if we were able to take advantage of being a city that's sandwiched by two very beautiful waterways that
Mhm.
are very productive.
Mhm. Yeah, I completely agree. And as I said, I think it's important to have a clean waterway. It attracts tourism and recreation. And if they're going to build along the waterway, I think it behooves the city to make sure it's a clean area.
Yep.
So
Yep.
maybe this is a good first step.
Yep. Back in March, March 15th of 2023, the Institute posted a survey of Philadelphia voters, and the poll was about the most important issues for the residents for the upcoming elections. And the number one issue by far was crime, which um, is interesting because we're changing chiefs of police, we're changing mayors.
Mhm.
We're going to, have a necessarily different approach to crime as a new mayor's office begins, and also as a new chief of police commissioner is chosen. Um, what do you think? What are you what are you a Philadelphia voter? Do you live in Philadelphia?
No, I'm in Montgomery County. I'm in Lansdale.
Hmm.
And not for anything, we have the same concerns, out in the suburbs, in terms of crime and so on. It's not a particularly high crime area where I am, but we want safe streets, and um, uh, that is just part of government duty and infrastructure.
Yeah. I mean, I always say, like when people are are upset about it, I'm always like, well, it is the rights enumerated in the Declaration of Independence, the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You can't have any of those without security.
Right.
But yeah, um,
Well, the first
the
duty of government is to safeguard its citizenry.
right, yeah. I always wonder. Some folks are very like anti. Like one of the excuse me, one of the recent things that I've seen is um who was it? Oh, um Sarah Huckabee Sanders, now governor of Arkansas, formerly press secretary to Donald Trump, um, declared that she wouldn't allow the federal government to institute mask mandates for school children in Arkansas again. Um, After recently also signing a bill that lifts work permit requirements for children in Arkansas, so they can work in a factory at age 16, but we don't want them wearing masks to protect them from COVID. Um, but yeah, like like a lot of people are very anti-regulation, protection from things when dictated by the government, and yet that is one of the duties of government is to protect its citizenry. I'm always fascinated by that. Um, and the folks that are like very pro law and order being very like anti-vaccination at the same time. It's incongruous to me. Like it's very frustrating. um, in the poll, the other issues that came out to the forefront were public schools education, and with 75% of the respondents were felt that to be important. Economy and jobs, 65%. Homelessness, 59%. Affordable housing, 57%. Opioid use 55%, and city services / infrastructure 51%. So that's why today's episode is about infrastructure. Here in Philadelphia, we tend to have occasional infrastructure problems. The biggest ones are like that I hear about anyway are potholes and trash collection issues. Um, there is a somewhat of a litter problem here in Philadelphia. You know, Having traveled a lot of different cities, there's a lot more litter and just general, uh, I don't know, residue of life on the
No,
streets here. Yeah.
again, I'm from the suburbs, but I can tell you that the pothole situation in Philadelphia even reaches up to us in terms of that issue in Philly being somewhat legendary. People all, kind of laugh at, yes, you can lose your car in the potholes in Philly. So that's, as far as I know, that's been around for quite some time. The other matters with litter and so on, not familiar with it, but again, I think that's one of the first duties of government is to kind of to take care of those infrastructure issues, litter, garbage collection, the roads, all top of the list. And in terms of the amount of taxes that Philadelphians pay, I think they're owed that.
Yeah. Infrastructure is always a fine balance between how much you tax a people and how much you can provide. I find interesting one of the interesting things about Philadelphia as far as taxation and infrastructure goes. A lot of times, the federal government will use infrastructure as a way to create expenditures to boost the economy. And we can't really do that here in Philadelphia because our home rule charter basically prevents the city from borrowing money. We can only work with what we collect in taxes. Um, the recent pandemic, the change over to more remote working, um, the changeover of like whose income is earned where is kind of a big issue for Philadelphia because Philadelphia derives a lot of its tax income from a lot of its tax receipts from income taxes. It's a unique
Mhm.
city in that way. We don't derive
Mhm.
most of our income from property taxes. Um, and perhaps rightfully so. I mean, to provide the infrastructure that a big city needs to support large businesses, we're not going to be able to do it from all property tax. Like you can't tax like say Comcast enough to make up for the extra wear and tear that Comcast puts on the systems of Philadelphia. Even just like the sewage system or the electricity system, much less the roads, or Amazon has, their distribution centers that they just pop up in, a warehousing section of Philadelphia. And how are you can't tax that business enough to provide the good roadway that they need to get in and out. Um, so, yeah, I find interesting like the kind of dance that we've been doing with remote work and how we tax people. Um, I'm gonna find it interesting to see what future mayoral candidates think of how they're going to compensate for this loss in tax receipts while still providing the infrastructure that we need. You can't sweep the streets with street sweepers that cost $100,000 a year to run if you don't have $100,000 a year to spend.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I'm kind of interested in that. Um, I guess we'll see. I don't know what's going to happen with that exactly. Uh, it'll be interesting. Um, so kind of a rough transition. Outlaw being out, I was covering as you were joining. I was talking about how the Outlaw being installed as police commissioner resulted in some of the ways of protests being dealt with during the beginning of the pandemic being a lot different than the plans that we had in place for protests up to that point. I've as a journalist been covering protests since long before George Floyd. There were protests against um, efforts by the Trump administration to curtail women's rights. There were protests before that. There were protests. There's a good protest every 2-3 years here in Philadelphia,
Mhm.
and yeah. As I was mentioning, the methodology um, had been changed such that police would not interfere with protests. They made protests safe, which I think is kind of a good thing. I don't know. I think that's actually kind of what our Constitution guarantees. The right to freedom of speech and to protest and to gather and to redress your issues with the government. I was having a conversation with a fellow denizen of the marina the other day, and he was on the opposite side of this issue from me, but he was like, I don't think that protesters blocking a highway is legal, and I pointed out that yeah, actually it is legal. That the Supreme Court has ruled several times in a few landmark hearings that blocking a roadway, blocking traffic is completely freedom of speech, as a speech issue, and is your First Amendment right. Um, but during the protests, especially during the protests with the pandemic, we had several instances of all across the nation, really, people pushing for protesters who blocked highways to not be allowed to do that. Um, I don't know what generation you're of, but you know, my generation, we didn't protest too much in our teens and 20s. We really started protesting in our 30s. Um, I don't know. In the and then looking backwards from there, the 90s and the 80s didn't have much protests except for like the anti-nuclear protests. I guess there were also like environmentalist protests. But yeah, I'm trying to figure out when this dichotomy really got started. You know, like there used to be, you know, in the 60s, there were protests, but they were for civil rights, and you know, like it was pretty clear which side you were on, like just by what you thought about civil rights. Um, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, protests have been around. I'm 64. As long as I can remember, from the 60s straight on through. I mean, Newark was almost burned to the ground uh, because of protests and race riots and so on, and through the 70s and 80s. And just circling back to what you had said about blocking highways, I don't know if it's legal or illegal to do so. I just think it, regardless of your cause, it gives you a very bad face if you are blocking highways. You don't know what's going on in terms of who is trying to get where. Maybe there's a pregnant woman trying to get to the hospital. Maybe there's EMT trying to get someplace, and if you can't get there, you know, I think blocking highways just does more harm than good. There are better ways to do it.
Well,
And
I mean, this was the crux of the argument even back during the time, but during those protests. You know, like from the protester side of the argument, what better way to amplify your voice than by causing, you know, a massive shutdown to roads? You know, like how better to amplify your issue to the common person, such that they can notice it. You know,
that
um,
may amplify your voice because it does make the news and so on. I don't think it amplifies it in a very positive way, though.
I mean,
You know,
the
it just doesn't.
is all are then we go to the argument, is all news good news, or is there such a thing as negative PR? You know, especially with an issue that's divisive, people are gonna, you know, are you gonna come down against civil rights because you don't like that somebody blocked the highway to claim their civil rights?
No, but I think what'll happen is you'll be one of quote unquote those people. Oh, those are the people that block the highway. I don't want to hear about it. Done. And I think that's why I say there are very legitimate issues that they may be supporting, but you go to those lengths and it's going to be a turnoff. That's just the way it is.
All right. Well, let's talk.
Well,
Let's talk Cop City
I don't
then.
necessarily disagree with what they may be protesting or want to bring to the forefront, but that, you know, doing it that way,
All right.
it's just,
Let's talk Cop City then. In Atlanta, In Atlanta, Georgia. They're outside of Atlanta in the woods. They're building a training facility for the Atlanta Police Department. Now, this
Okay.
hasn't hit national news. Like you don't see coverage on this on CNN or MSNBC or anything like that. Um, but there's been a protest going on in Atlanta for about 2 years straight over this. There are environmental concerns as well as the concerns about spending, as well as just general concerns about the tactics being taught in this in this proposed training facility, and who would be trained and what equipment that they would get. There are a core group of protesters, about 100 or so, that have been on and off working on this protest. There are several nonprofits involved. And about 6 months ago, a man even lost his life because the police raided a sit-in protest of the construction site, and shot one of the protesters because they thought he had a weapon. He did not, in fact, have a weapon. And the investigation is ongoing into why he was shot. But as usual, they'll probably find themselves not guilty of doing anything because they're investigating themselves. That's always problematic to me. But have you heard of any of this?
Okay, I was about to say that I cannot comment on any of that. I'm not familiar with what's going down in the Atlanta area. So that's something I would certainly have to research and then be able to offer an opinion. Right now.
So, and my point in bringing this up is, like, you haven't heard of any of it yet. Like, a man even died during this protest. A man was shot to death during this protest. Like, I would think that's, that's something that normally would hit news everywhere, but it seems that isn't even big enough an amplification any longer to hit national news. So what better way than a peaceful blockade of traffic would you say to amplify an issue like that? I don't know. I mean, honestly, I don't know. Like, we could write all the books and plays and perform all the things in the world. I'm a big proponent of bringing artistic solutions to things. But unfortunately, sometimes, it seems like we, as a society, don't pay attention to things until they're in some way upsetting to our daily lives, I guess.
James, I think that shows like yours are a far better way to amplify a position, whatever position you take, left, right, center, doesn't matter. I think, again, shows like yours are a far better way to reach an empathetic audience than the methods that you're referring to. I mean, I'll listen to a show like yours far more than I'll listen to somebody who's blocking traffic. Again, unfortunately or unfortunately, people like that just get painted with the same broad brush, and maybe their issues are 100% legitimate. Like, perhaps this person was killed, and he shouldn't have been. He was just an innocent bystander for all intents and purposes. Who knows? But when you start protesting and blocking traffic and causing that kind of civil unrest, that's a tough one to support, in my opinion. I mean, your show, yeah, I'll listen, sure. I definitely want to hear about it. But, when you start interfering with interstate commerce that way, again, you don't know if there's a woman trying to get to the hospital, trying to see her dying mother. Who knows what you're doing? And it's just not fair to the general public. That's why I don't like it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily like or dislike it. I don't have a strong opinion about it other than the thing that I fall back on is it was how civil rights was won, and it was, ruled on by the courts in the 60s, and adjudicated as legal and as a method of freedom of speech. So, um, I'll forever fight for folks to be able to speak however they want, just so long as it's legal. I even don't necessarily believe in certain types of speech being illegal, because sometimes we go a little far with that. But I'll accept an argument when the speech is illegal. But like just from my perspective, I don't think there's an argument on this one. I think, like, we've already had the argument. Why do we continue to have it? Perhaps I don't know. I mean, everybody's entitled to their opinion, so.
I mean, when you say continue to have this argument, are you referring to free speech?
Yeah, freedom of speech in general, how we speak. Why do we continually try to dictate how people speak, when it is not, when it's nonviolent, when it's not. I often have said, like, there's free speech, quote unquote, absolutists who oftentimes seem to come down on the side of actually, supporting fascism and or racism, and like actually come down more on the side of supporting that than actually supporting freedom of speech. And I always say to that, your freedom of speech ends where my right to life begins.
Freedom of speech supports more of the speech that is considered unpopular. Maybe you don't like it. Maybe you don't like someone to be able to talk about fascism or communism or whatever ism. Fortunately or unfortunately, they have the right to talk about it and to support it.
Oh, sure. No. I don't support stopping people from speaking about stuff. What I do, what I was just saying is the right to freedom of speech stops where another person's right to life begins. So if your speech is about ending another person's life, you don't have you're not practicing legal freedom of speech.
Give me an example.
For instance, Nazi talking points, the 14 words, huh?
What are they? I don't know what they are.
14 words. You can look it up. It's the Nazi phrase, the phrase created by neo-Nazis to support white supremacy. And it's often referenced in modern speech. Even recently was tweeted out by an account on Twitter and then liked by Elon Musk, the owner of Twitter. And it's strictly about ending lives like mine. I'm a mixed ethnicity person. I'm a brown person. I'm a descendant of African enslaved people. And the essence of the ethos is that I don't deserve a life. I don't deserve to live. That's not freedom of speech. You don't get to say that the consequence of allowing that speech is too great. And the Supreme Court again has ruled that same thing. Like like this has been said, this fight has been had, and we don't usually have to fight about it. It's not usually a thing until recently that people would disagree with.
I don't know if the Supreme Court has made illegal certain words or certain expressions. I would be
Not specific ones, but the Supreme Court has definitely made limits on freedom of speech, and the limits are that you can't incite people to violence, you can't incite people into killing other people.
that's
You can't create a situation through your speech that causes death or harm.
that has been illegal for a very, very long time, incitement of riot and so on and so forth. Yes, that's been illegal forever. But a belief in a certain ideology, whether you like it or I like it, is certainly legal. I don't
Yeah,
like
you can't thought police anybody.
a Nazi ideology or what have you, but people are allowed to believe what they want to believe. That is the beauty of freedom of speech. And again, that's unpopular. That part of speech is certainly unpopular with most people, but unfortunately, people do in fact believe it, and they're allowed to in this
Yeah,
country.
like I said, you can't thought police anybody. Anybody can believe anything that they want. Anybody actually can say anything they want. There's still consequences to it. And there's also consequences to supporting violent speech, which is the reason why inciting people to riot, inciting people to violence is illegal. Even though we have a freedom to speak, we have a duty to stop speech that would infringe on the other inalienable rights of humanity. A freedom of speech isn't an inalienable right as all of our other rights are. The inalienable rights are the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness.
I would say freedom of speech would be number one.
It's not though.
Well, it is though, because
It's not. It's not an inalienable right. The government does have the right to limit your speech.
but I think you're conflating two concepts. You're saying on one hand you can't incite a riot. That's a crime. Okay, clearly, and that does not fall under the purview of the First Amendment. However, what I'm saying is that religion, ideology, your belief system is not something the government can come in and regulate.
No,
That
but I'm not conflating those two concepts. You're conflating them for me. I'm saying that they are separate things. You in and of yourself can believe anything you want. You can believe in the flying spaghetti monster. It's fine. What you don't have the right to do is proselytize your beliefs if they would cause the death of other people. That is the limit of freedom of speech.
You would have to provide an example of that, because I don't.
Well, I mean, the Proud Boys who were just all sentenced to multiple decades in prison were all convicted of seditious speech.
Sedition is a crime against the government. That does not fall under the First Amendment.
Right.
So
Neither does the crime of incitement to violence, which is these are all types of speech. They're not. There is a limit to the freedom of speech. The limit to the freedom of speech is when other people's lives become endangered.
well, as I said, I think you're conflating the two. So if I say to somebody, "I'm going to kill you," that is not my freedom of speech to say I'm going to kill you. What I've just committed is a crime.
Yes.
So,
but you can believe that you have a right to kill somebody. You can believe that. That is your right to believe whatever you want. I'm not conflating the two. Your belief system is not governable because that's inside your head. What you let out of your head is governable.
Okay. I think although just to put a comma on your comment.
Recording stopped.
Okay. I think if you believe you can kill somebody, there's something wrong with the way you think.
Oh, sure. No, I absolutely believe that there's something wrong with that. I don't agree that, I don't agree with that belief system. I wouldn't say that's correct or that's a correct belief. But as you said, you can't dictate what somebody believes. And that little recording stop notice, if the audience heard it, is just my camera computer having a problem. So I will get that back up here in a moment. But they can still hear you.
That's okay. James, I actually have to run. I wasn't anticipating this type of conversation. I was anticipating talking about Irena Sendler or the play, that kind of thing. I'm happy to have these talks, but I would have liked to have been a little prepared to
Oh, that's
know that.
okay. I mean, yeah, no, I have these kinds of conversations all the time. It's just, and what we're talking about does in essence tie back to Sendler and your piece. And if we can tie it back real quick, in that Sendler was a hero by modern standards, and had to not speak when she otherwise could have, because it was dangerous for her, and her freedom of speech was curtailed by the politics of the time that she lived.
No doubt. Absolutely no question about that. She was given an award in Israel in the 60s and 50s or 60s. Now I don't recall exactly, but the communist government wouldn't allow.
Recording in progress.
The communist government would not allow her to travel to Israel to receive her award. So it was a very restrictive time for her. And as I said earlier, after World War II, she was labeled a fascist. Eventually, her exploits and her achievements leaked out because some of the kids who she had rescued recognized her, saw her picture in a newspaper or what have you, and started to reach out to her. Eventually, this created kind of a groundswell, and she became quite famous. I mean, there are schools and roads and so on named after her in Warsaw. She never left Warsaw. So she was quite the individual. And one thing I love about her is that she was so modest about it. One of the things she said that, I'm no hero, I did so little. And I think that's really a fascinating aspect of her personality. Just real quick, as part of the putting this project together, we some of the team and I went to New Jersey to a Holocaust museum there. It's a small little facility. And long story short, we met with a Holocaust survivor who had told us his story, how he was taken to Bergen-Belsen when he was 6 or 7 years old. And one of the interesting aspects of that was that his mother had cut a hole in the wall, knowing that eventually, they were in Amsterdam, knowing that eventually the Nazis would come for them. So the idea was to hide the kids in the wall while the Nazis came and looked and took the rest of their family. The neat thing about that story is that if she hadn't done that, those kids may not have survived. And he was one of those kids. He was eventually made his way to the United States, got married, had 3 girls. They had 2 kids each, and one of his granddaughters was at his talk. So long story short, this one life, if it had been snuffed out, would have meant that these other 9 lives would not have been given the chance to live. And that's one of the aspects of Irena Sendler's story that I find so fascinating. Multiply that experience by over 2,000, because all of her children survived the war, and many of them, the vast majority of them, went on to have families and so on. And again, her effect on humanity is just exponential, and it was just an incredible achievement, and that's why I wanted to tell the story.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time today. I'm gonna go to a one-up of me, get you off camera, and then you'll be able to drop out of the chat if you like. You can stick around until I outro the show if you'd like to chat some more. And I'm just gonna cover the last topic here by myself for a second. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be happy to have you back on whenever you do have the show in production, and I really look forward to it.
Thank you very much, James, for your time today and allowing me to tell the story.
Thanks.
For the show. Thanks again.
And thank you guys for joining us every week. I really appreciate it. We do this show to bring folks opinions, artists, and interesting topics of the day. The last topic I didn't cover today is DeSantis at 18%. Recent poll puts him down another 8 points from his 26% of the likely Republican voters down to 18% of the likely Republican voters. Whether you take that as good news or bad news, I find it interesting news. It seems that the more and more the general Republican voting base sees of Ron DeSantis, the less and less they like it, which is interesting because they seem to like Donald Trump. So I guess it is what it is. I'm just going to go with the good news that, the Proud Boys leadership have been found guilty of seditious conspiracy for the most part for their efforts on January 6th to overturn the election of the United States presidency of Joe Biden. And the judge, a Trump appointee, has been repeatedly saying how egregious this was, that they tried to overthrow the government and that they basically eliminated the record that the United States had for over 200 years of a peaceful transition of power between leadership. We can't claim that any longer. We can't claim to be the only country that has always had a peaceful transition of power between leadership year after year. I don't know. Maybe throw the Civil War out when you're thinking that way, but we'll glass over it just for the point. At any rate. We do have another great show for you next Wednesday. Please tune in. We'll have Meadow Perry talking about her fringe show Populence. And we'll have more news and information and exciting topics. We'll talk a bit more about the mayoral election, of course. I'll see if there's any other interesting local news that pops up. We'll talk a bit more about Cop City and the Stop Cop City protests because I want to keep highlighting that in this broadcast. The Stop Cop City protest leadership was brought up on RICO charges by the same district attorney that brought Trump up on RICO charges. So, for those of you that have been all rah-rah about RICO charges for Trump, it cuts multiple ways, apparently, and we should probably be careful about what we celebrate because it seems like these charges are being used in a negligent way against people who have a valid comment on modern politics. Anyway, that's just my opinion. Your opinion may vary. Feel free to tune in next week. Please like and subscribe on this broadcast. That way you'll get notifications when we go live next week. Please comment as we go. I see your comments no matter which of our streams they go up on. And if you disagree with me, if you disagree with my guest, if you agree with me, if you agree with my guest, if you just have a unique perspective that you want to put out there, please toss it in the comments. I'll be happy to read it out and or acknowledge it and give you some airtime for your thoughts. At any rate, tune in next week, everybody. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week.